I was in the auditorium demonstrating my blueprints to the top-ranking scientists. A sketch of my spacecraft was displayed on the screen, and I told the committee that this machine would be able to go into orbit using its own engines. And I know how to develop them. However, I had to stop halfway through. While I was talking, the science luminaries were whispering and laughing. I was fuming with outrage. What's so funny?
It is impossible. Yes, your calculations are good on paper, but in practice, it will not work.
Why not?
Are you suggesting that we spend another hour explaining the elementary laws of physics? No, it's a waste of time. So are your blueprints.
With these words, these smug old men got up and walked out of the classroom. Arrogant jerks! How could they even be on the committee? With anger, I began to tear my blueprints into small pieces, and would certainly have destroyed the result of years of my work if it were not for the voice that came from somewhere in the back of the classroom.
Do you really think you can build such an engine?
I peered into the audience. In the very last row, there was a man in a military uniform. Yes, I calculated everything, but it takes money and time to implement. That's why I counted so much on this grant. The man stood up, walked across the auditorium, and took from me the scraps on which my creation was flaunting just 5 minutes ago.
If you stop tearing up the drawings, I can show them to our committee. If your project is really worthwhile, you'll get 10 times more than some grant.
Of course, the offer interested me, and the man himself looked like someone I could trust. I gave him the blueprints. I had nothing left to lose. We agreed to meet tomorrow. Hi, I'm Harper, and today I will tell you how I got to Area 51. The next morning, a Hummer picked me up, even though I didn't give my address when I said goodbye to my new acquaintance. The colonel waited until I opened the door, entered the house, and got straight to the point.
Your project has been approved. Get ready.
Where am I going?
Since the project has been classified as top secret, you will have to stay at a military base.
I was taken aback. But I don't want... what military base? After all, apart from work, I had my own life, albeit lonely and isolated. The colonel explained that this was the only way I could get my money for my project.
Sometimes you have to sacrifice something for a great cause.
Reluctantly, I agreed. There might not be another such chance. We drove for a long time, until finally we reached the plane. I asked the colonel where we were going.
To Area 51.
Really? But the colonel didn't answer. I quickly shut my mouth and didn't ask any more questions I wasn't prepared to hear the answer to. In fact, there was nothing secret about Area 51. The government had long ago declared that it belonged to the U.S. Air Force, and it was quite logical that I would develop my secret engine there. I followed the colonel like a tail, afraid to do, say, or see anything wrong. He showed me where my laboratory was, where my room and canteen were located. Once again, following the colonel, I saw a long, dark hallway guarded by a sentinel. Colonel Ross, what's in there?
It's a good thing you asked. You are not allowed to go in there.
I was surprised by his reaction. But after all, it is a military base. What if I pushed a button and started World War III? I chose to go to my office. Every morning, I got up and worked on a project. A team of engineers and I began to assemble a working mock-up of the engine. The colonel said that soon we would start building the spacecraft itself. This encouraged me a lot, so I hurried to finish, staying late in my office even more often. One day, I finished later than usual. I was so tired that I took a wrong turn on the way to my room. I realized that when I was walking down a long corridor. It finally dawned on me that I had accidentally entered a restricted area. I listened. I could hear footsteps at the other end. It sounded like soldiers walking. I didn't want them to see me wandering around where I wasn't supposed to. There would be serious punishment for that. To avoid them, I hid around the corner. The sound of footsteps intensified as the soldiers approached. But amid the measured, loud footsteps, I heard a strange sound. It was as if someone was speaking in a foreign language. Strangely, it sounded unlike anything I've ever heard on Earth. My curiosity overpowered me, and I cautiously peeked around the corner. I almost cried out in horror. At the end of the corridor by the door stood Colonel Ross, and next to him, 2 soldiers were holding a strange creature. It was a head taller than them, and its skin was green. Its eyes were very large, and it had no nose. The creature suddenly looked in my direction. It seemed to be looking right into my eyes. I hurried to hide around the corner. I covered my mouth with a shaking palm to keep from screaming in fear. When I cautiously looked out again, there was no one in the corridor. Despite the powerful shock, I managed to find my way to my room. But once there, I couldn't think about anything but what I had just seen. Do aliens really exist? Then the stories about Area 51 are true too. I saw with my own eyes this tall, humanoid-looking creature. Maybe I imagined it? The next day, the colonel himself came to my lab.
Where were you yesterday?
Working.
Did you see anything unusual?
No. Did something happen? The colonel didn't answer the question. Instead, he walked over to the spacecraft and gently ran his palm over the hull.
When will it be ready?
I think a test launch can be arranged as early as tomorrow. The man was about to leave, but suddenly he turned around and held out a spherical-shaped object.
If you can help us how to figure out how it works, we didn't produce it.
I took the object and began to examine it curiously.
And yes, Miss Harper, don't stay late at work. You have to be in your room at 8 p.m.
I nodded. The colonel left. There was clearly something strange going on within the walls of this building. And what is this thing? I've never seen anything like it before. I twisted the unknown item in my hands for a while and then put it aside, intending to deal with it tonight. The spacecraft needed to be prepared for launch, so I stayed up late again. On my way back to the room, I stared at the sphere, with no idea on how it could be used. As I passed the hallway that led to the restricted area, the sphere in my hands began to glow with a cold green light. I decided to go closer to the corridor. The glow intensified. It was like it was guiding me somewhere. I hesitated for a moment, but I followed its guidance. My curiosity will get me killed. But the colonel told me to find out what this thing was. I'm just following his orders. With each step, the sphere glowed brighter and brighter. At some point, it suddenly went out. Only now did I realize that I was standing in front of the same door I'd seen yesterday. There was a strange sound behind the door. It sounded like the howl of a wounded animal. I peered through the glass window of the door. In the corner of the dimly lit room sat the same humanoid. He was chained up, and I noticed bruises on his body. The blood was red, like human blood. It was clear from the marks on his body that he had been tortured. The creature noticed me. It opened its mouth and made some kind of pathetic chirping sound. I felt so sorry for it. It seemed to have suffered a lot. Suddenly, there was a loud voice behind me. I flinched.
I thought I told you to go straight to your room after work.
Curiosity overcame fear, so I asked, "Is it an alien?"
Yes, but you won't tell anyone anything.
The colonel pushed me, and I hit the door. The sphere fell out of my hands and rolled across the floor. The colonel drew his gun and pointed it at me. I guess I should have said goodbye to life. Suddenly, a cold green glow flooded the entire corridor, and the humanoid appeared behind the colonel. He had the sphere in his hands, and the wounds on his body were gone. The alien touched the colonel's arm. The soldier froze in place and couldn't move again, and the humanoid came up to me and helped me up. Though he didn't look like us, you could tell he was scared too. He spread his arms. I wondered what to do, because he couldn't be left here. He would be tortured or just taken apart piece by piece, wanting to make sense of his anatomy. Suddenly, I had an idea. I grabbed his arm and yanked it. He followed me. As we ran down the dark corridor, we heard the colonel scream, "Get them!" The military alarm went off at the base. Damn, now all the military will be looking for us. 2 soldiers stood in our way and pointed their machine guns at us. My new friend activated the sphere again. It lit up the entire corridor in green. The soldiers froze, just as the colonel had earlier. Very handy device, I thought. We were already running up to the lab. The voices of a dozen soldiers could be heard behind us. I opened the huge doors with my key and we ran inside. I pressed the button to close the doors, but they were too damn slow to close. The military was very close. The humanoid stepped forward, holding the sphere in his hands. He raised it above his head, but this time the sphere barely shone, and the soldiers didn't freeze. Now they were running as if in slow motion. The thing seemed to have run out of batteries. Nevertheless, the delay was enough for the gate to close right in front of the soldiers' noses. At least I could get some rest. I showed the alien my spacecraft, but as soon as I opened the apparatus door, the muzzle of a gun pointed at my face. The colonel looked at me and smirked. How did he manage to get in here? Some secret passage for evil colonels? The alien began to squeeze the sphere with all his might, but it was no longer glowing. Is it dead? Gadgets are so unreliable. But how did you get here so quickly?
This base is equipped with a network of tunnels, and I know every one of them. Do you realize that what you're about to do is a betrayal of the homeland?
Saving my own life means betraying the homeland? The colonel was pointing his gun at the alien, then at me.
He is a monster who could threaten the security of our planet. Who knows? Maybe he'll fly away and bring an army here.
You tortured him and held him captive. You are the only monster here. To hell with it. The colonel turned the gun from me to the alien. A gunshot was fired. My body began to shake and I could barely stand up. I looked at my hand. It was covering my stomach, bleeding. I shielded my green friend at the last moment. The colonel looked at me. There was horror on his face, and the alien was very angry. He swung his huge green hand and hit the colonel. The colonel flew aside like a feather. My legs buckled, but the alien picked me up and carried me into the spacecraft, then gently strapped me into the seat. Surprisingly, the humanoid knew how to operate an aircraft. They have certainly outpaced us in technology a long time ago. My vision was blurring and I was getting very cold. The green creature grabbed my hand and squeezed it tightly. Moments later, I heard the roar of the engines starting up and felt a jolt. I passed out. In the morning, I woke up in the bedroom of my house. At first, I thought it was just a dream, but then I examined myself and saw the scar on my stomach. I decided to tell the world what had happened with me and my new friend at Area 51. I know this story is hard to believe, but I have proof that everything I've told you is true. The green sphere that happened to be beside me when I woke up. The colonel is still looking for me, and I know that sooner or later he will find me, but I don't regret anything. And when I look up into the night sky, I always say, "See you, green one. Green one. Green one."